one for local news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Wednesday, February 23rd. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now, -8 in Ottawa, -6 in Smiths Falls. Feeling a little bit colder in the wind, and here's what's making news in Ottawa and the Valley. Ottawa City Council meets this morning for the first time since downtown streets were cleared of the occupation. Councillors will discuss helping businesses and what went wrong during the occupation response. Here's City News reporter Chris Curries.
A total of 5 motions are coming forward aimed at helping Ottawa's downtown. They include a property tax deferral for affected businesses and restaurants downtown, marketing money for tourism, a plan for live musical performances, and free parking for a month, all aimed at helping make up for the money businesses lost during the occupation. There's also a motion for a review of the city's response to the occupation. The independent evaluation's goal would be to improve overall planning, coordination, and communications, and would report back to the city's Finance and Economic Development Committee by late May. Chris Curries, City News.
City News time, 9:01. Freezing rain and icy conditions certainly made the drive and chipping off the car this morning a little bit of a chore. Here's the latest with City News reporter Jason White.
Several hours of freezing rain that at one point mixed with ice pellets overnight has kept road crews busy. The City of Ottawa's Bryden Denyer says his crews have been focused on trying to keep the major routes ice-free.
The challenge with freezing rain is everything gets coated in ice at the exact same time, right? So we need to treat all aspects of the transportation system as fast as possible.
The plan is to work their way through the network of residential and side streets through the day. In the meantime, those routes and sidewalks are more likely to be slippery, he says, so he urges you to drive to the conditions. Jason White, City News.
Now, what's the weather for the rest of the day? Here's our meteorologist, Jill Taylor.
A wintry mix for us this morning. We've already reached our high for the day. We'll sit at about -10 this afternoon and -19 for the overnight low. It'll feel like -24 for early tomorrow. Mainly clear tonight. Tomorrow, sun and cloud, the high just -10. For today, already reached our high for the day. For the afternoon, near -10.
And right now in Ottawa, -8. In Smiths Falls, it's -6. Well, for the first time since the crisis in Ukraine began, that country today declared a state of emergency. Aaron Katersky is in western Ukraine.
Once approved by the parliament, the head of Ukraine's National Security Council said the nationwide state of emergency would last 30 days. It comes amid fears Russia is on the verge of a full-scale invasion. President Putin has already recognized the independence of 2 rebel regions in the east, but no one here is confident he'll stop at that.
Now, after weeks of trying to project calm, Ukrainian authorities also today advised against travel to Russia, also recommending anyone there leave immediately, saying Moscow's aggression could lead to a significant reduction in consular services. City News time, 9:03. The province has introduced an amendment that could push back the deadline for the budget in the province. That was supposed to be delivered by the end of March. Now this legislation would move it to possibly the end of April. The budget expected to lay out much of the progressive conservative spending plans ahead of the June provincial vote. And the legislature has unanimously passed a motion authorizing the Speaker to bar independent member from Eastern Ontario from taking part in the chamber. The motion says the House expresses its disapproval of Randy Hillier's continued poor conduct. The motion calls on him to apologize for racist and discriminatory statements about Federal Transport Minister Omar Al-Gabra and for some social media posts. I'm Andrew Boyle for News Anytime. Follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
He's got the news and the views.
He's got views on the news.
It's the Rob Snow Show on Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Good morning, Ottawa. Welcome to the Rob Snow Show. Rob is off today. Derek Fage here, host of Daytime Ottawa on Rogers TV, filling in. Oh, my goodness. Wow, it's been a while since we chatted, friends. It's been a little while. And like most of you, I've been spending a lot of time trying to understand how we've gotten to this point. Okay? Let me share some thoughts. So, the protest, the occupation, the siege, whatever you want to call it, was and is far more than a call to end vaccine mandates, masking, and other restrictions. Although protesters are no longer camped out in front of Parliament Hill, they have taken up spots on properties within a couple of hours of Ottawa. Some protesters have set up camps on private properties, by the way, in Arnprior, Embrun, Vankleek Hill, and Greeley. And as one caller to the Rob Snow Show put it a couple of weeks ago when I filled in for Rob, this protest has become a movement. And I would go so far to say for some, it's become a cult-like movement, but for most, a movement. The challenge of this movement, however, remains. Most of us, of course, let out a huge sigh of relief once that last truck was removed from downtown Ottawa, but the anger and the distrust remains. So I was trying to come up with a description for some of the people that have joined this movement, because people have joined this movement for many different reasons, okay? From many different backgrounds and many different demographics. And I finally came up with one description for some of the people, and that is social outcasts. And I don't use that term in an insulting manner, because I, too, I consider myself, at one point in my life, a social outcast, and I'll explain why in just a moment. So, first of all, from many of the interviews I witnessed with protesters over the last 3 weeks and some of the callers we've spoken to right here on the Rob Snow Show, it has become obvious that many people have felt left out. And left out of what? Well, I guess you could just say society in general. We're inundated on television, streaming services, and social media with the perfect lives now of everyday people, right? We used to be inundated with it when it comes to celebrities and athletes and the like. But now we're inundated with the perfect lives of everyday people. And people have been dealing with economic anxiety and frustration over the unequal distribution of wealth for a long time. I think that's one of the biggest reasons that people are feeling left out. They don't feel like there's anything, and they don't feel like there's anything they can do about it. As Aaron Wary from the CBC has put it in his latest article, there's this diminished sense of economic fairness. And there's political polarization that has increased tenfold in this country. You see, Fox News has been lapping up stories from the protests here in Canada. And those who feel like social outcasts find themselves empowered by the attention they're receiving both here and in the U.S. The die-hard people that gathered for the full 3 weeks and the people who are camped out in Arnprior and Embrun and Vankleek Hill and Greeley are not simply retirees who have the time and the means to dedicate themselves to this movement. You see young men and women, middle-aged men and women, people with young families. You know, some of these people, sure, they're retired. Some are spending what little savings they have to be there. Some are happy to collect social assistance and camp out at these places because they have found a place where they feel they belong. And then people say, oh, is it sustainable? Well, it might very well be, right? There's food, there's water, there's fuel. Better weather is ahead as well. But more importantly, there are people there who give them a sense of belonging. They can share their stories from the front lines, as they called it, with those who are joining them now, or those that were there alongside them. They can share stories of the inequality they faced in their entire lives, the distrust of government and the media. And honestly, it makes sense to me. I don't agree with how they've voiced their grievances and frustrations, but I do understand where they're coming from. And perhaps you do as well. If you look back on your life and you find those moments, those memories when you felt like an outcast. I look back on my elementary school, high school years, and I can identify with that lack of belonging. I had the good fortune of turning to drama and theater. That's where I found my like-minded people, my social outcasts. I dropped out of high school 3 times until I finally smartened up and graduated. And if you think I'm making this up, for the sake of, scoring some points with you, the listener, look up my TEDx talk, okay? There's my story. And you'll find out why I felt like a social outcast. And I guarantee you, many of the people listening right now feel that way. And I was most certainly a social outcast. I was an immature young man at the same time as well. And this is perhaps why we were so frustrated with this group of protesters and occupiers. It's because we saw a lack of maturity with so many. Many treated the situation as a big party, right? There's plenty of alcohol. There's pot to go around. There's plenty of food. We got bouncy castles and hot tubs and saunas and live music and DJs, and the list goes on. All the while, people in the area were suffering. I mean, and then listening to the interviews, the amount of misinformation was astounding. The treatment of the media was maddening. I mean, quite frankly, upsetting to watch at times. Was it necessary to end the occupation using some force? I believe absolutely. We could not allow it to continue. It should not have continued for so long, but it did. And now we have to figure out why so many people feel like social outcasts. Again, I think this is beyond the mandates and the restrictions. There's a long road ahead of healing for this country. But I think it's possible with good leadership. We need to find that good leadership at every level of government. It has been missing for a long time, by the way. It's not, the pandemic has just shone a light on that lack of leadership like I haven't seen in my lifetime. I believe we need to put in an effort to not only vote, but we have to join this at a grassroots level. And I know, maybe you don't want to get involved in politics, but if we want to make a difference, we have to get involved in politics. At the municipal level, we have a chance to change the face of City Council on October 24th. I mean, we really do. We're going to have a new mayor. A number of seats are already open. You may be upset with some of the people, and you may, there are some city councilors that I think have gone above and beyond during this pandemic and then during this occupation. Here's another thing I think we need to do. And you know what? I haven't done it myself, so I'm not here preaching, oh, look at I'm so great. We need to join a political party. Become a member of a political party that we best align with. Obviously a party which you agree with, the general principles of the party. I mean, it's easy to do. You can join online. Membership for political parties differ. You can go from free to $15 a year. $15 a year is the maximum to join a political party annually. We all have $15. It's at that stage, voting for the leader of the party you best align with, that needs fixing. It's not who's already the member of the party and we go to a federal election or we go to a provincial election and that's our opportunity to make change. That's not the opportunity. Look at the choices we have right now. The choices we've had in the past, we can do better. I'm going to guess that most of you listening here in Ottawa have lost faith in all levels of government. I don't blame you because I certainly have, but we can do better. We can't keep voting for the best of the worst. That's how so many people, when I ask, well, how did you vote? What did you think, of the members of the, well, I voted for the best of the worst. They're all terrible. So I had to vote for somebody because I wanted, to be able to complain about them. And in order to complain, people tell me I need to vote. If the leader of the NDP or the leader of the Liberals or the leader of the Conservative Party, if you look at that leader and you're not happy with your choice and you're simply voting on the best of the worst, we have a big problem. So there's my opening remarks for the day today. Very calm. Didn't use one bad word this time around. Very calm. But we can do better. So, our question for you then, in the Talk Back Hour, which as you know, we open up the lines to you, the listener. 10 o'clock, after the 10 o'clock news, a full hour dedicated to your opinions. Our question for the Talk Back Hour is simple. After watching the last 3 weeks unfold, how much faith do you have in our governments at all levels and their ability to work together to meet challenges? Do you remember the beginning of the pandemic? There was probably a lovely 4-week period there where we saw political parties working together and it was like an aha moment. Oh, is this what it looks like? I really felt that way. I was like, oh, okay, this is what it looks like. This is wonderful. We're in the most challenging times we've seen in recent history, and then all of a sudden it just fell apart, right? I mean, do you tune into question period? It's a disaster. And you might say, Derek, it's been a disaster for a long time. Agreed. Now it's worse than a disaster. So we encourage you, give us a call after the 10 o'clock news, 613-750-1310. Write that number down. Really want to hear your opinions on this because the lack of leadership has just been incredibly disappointing. What else do we have coming up? Well, later this morning, City Council is going to meet, and on the docket are several motions to do with providing new targeted business support for those businesses in downtown Ottawa that closed during the protests over the past 3 weeks. We'll go over the many motions that both Jim Watson and members of City Council have brought forth. One of the key partners, by the way, in designing support programs and administering funds is the Ottawa Coalition of BIAs. And the chair of that organization will join me next to discuss what businesses need and whether or not they are getting it. Rob is off today. Derek Fage here from Rogers TV filling in. You are watching it on Rogers TV and right here on City News. We'll be right back after this.
Here at the Thirsty Maiden, we offer a variety of products. So everything from breakfast items, so it's breakfast sandwiches and scones, which have become a staple item here at the cafe. We have an assortment of pastries and cakes and desserts. So we're really big on our dessert bar, which a lot of people come here for. And of course, our delicious coffee beverages. So we do offer not your typical lattes, things like a chocolate banana coconut latte, cinnamon coconut, which is my favorite, and our take on even a pumpkin spice, which we add nutmeg and a dash of cayenne in just to give it a bit of a kick. When you start a business, you don't factor in all the things that could go wrong. You think anything that goes wrong, any failure, it's got to be something on your shoulders. You didn't market right, you're carrying the wrong products, you didn't price your items correctly, all the things, right? But when this pandemic began, things going through my brain were I didn't factor in a pandemic. And we were just starting to grow. We were about to blow up, and I think I spent 2 days crying. And then I shut my business down for, I think, a period of 2 or 3 days. And just being at home during that time, I realized this is not me. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a hard worker. I don't give up, and I'm a go-getter. And I started to think, well, I should probably just start clearing out my freezers and posting and seeing who wants to buy what. And that was sort of how I built my momentum back up. I realized that there's still a large number of people that wanted to support us and were looking for the items that I had to provide. So we started there. Then I reopened literally not even 3 or 4 days after I closed my doors, and then started doing curbside pickups and deliveries. Started doing the deliveries myself, free deliveries to the local community, going as far as Bell's Corners and Carp as well. And that's why we're still here. This community has really kept us going a year into the pandemic. We've had a changeover of staff a couple times now, and situations change, and when you can't offer hours and hours for your employees, you don't blame them when they have to go elsewhere. So I think that's also been one of the challenges is recruiting, training, and then they leave, and then bringing in more people and recruiting. And anybody in this industry will tell you that that's something we deal with on a regular basis, whether or not COVID's in the mix or not. But more so now, because every time there's a lockdown, there's a risk of, will we make it through? And then you lay off more staff. And again, their situations and their circumstances change.
The world is changing.
So keep up with Rob.
The Rob Snow Show returns on Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
Welcome Welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. Rob is off today. Derek Fage here from Rogers TV filling in for Rob. As mentioned just before the break, Mayor Jim Watson and City Council have promised a slate of measures aimed at helping the city recover from the 3-week-long anti-government protests that kept streets blocked with heavy trucks and parties and protests. Of course, has caused many businesses to close for the safety of staff and customers. So here's some of the motions, by the way. Targeted property tax deferral program for eligible retail business and restaurants in the affected areas. Funding to help the most impacted business districts program and market their destination. Support for the Ottawa Music Industry Coalition to offer local musical performance in the impacted neighborhoods, and expansion of the no fare transit, no charge parking. Also, Councillor Catherine McKenney bringing forward a motion to keep a section of Wellington Street closed to cars permanently. But on the business side of things, we wanted to get the opinion of the Executive Director of the Ottawa Coalition of BIAs, Michelle Grew, joins us on the show. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Hi, Derek. Thanks for having me.
A pleasure. So first off, I wanted to get your reaction to the police enforcement in the downtown core, because, you know, they still have a lot of streets blocked. They've opened up as much of the business areas as they seem to feel possible, while still, you know, maintaining some control down there. So what's your reaction to the enforcement that you're seeing right now in the downtown core?
Well, I'd have to say it's very welcome at this time. Obviously, we're all still on the edge. You know, there are a couple of areas that are still really closed off, that are kind of barricaded, that, you know, Spark Street, for example, that are kind of having some difficulties in having people come and go. But at the same time, police are telling people that they can enter the area.
Yeah, and you know, the reason it remains there is, you know, I mentioned at the top of the show that there are still some of these satellite camps within a couple of hours drive, some of them of Ottawa. You have one in Embrun, Vankleek Hill, Arnprior, and Greeley. So that I think that police enforcement is going to continue for a little while now. So the mayor's referenced, obviously, the Ottawa Coalition of BIAs as a partner that the government's going to be working with to provide these new targeted supports for businesses impacted by the protests. So what is the status of that work right now, Michelle?
So there's a few levels. Well, right now we're looking at 2 levels of government. So the feds have come out with their immediate plan. And then the city is going to be announcing several motions that are out today. You know, with FedDev Ontario, it's through Invest Ottawa, and we're going to be working with Invest Ottawa to get several grants to the impacted businesses in the area. And then, as you mentioned earlier on, you know, the city is going to come up with quite a few supports, including also like free transportation and free parking in the impacted areas. So are you satisfied with what you've heard as far as the promises go for government support? I'd say we're still looking for a lot more. Okay. You know, as you get closer to where the real damage was done, where the real blockades were, the impacts, the financial impacts on the businesses were a lot greater than what's been announced. But, you know, obviously we're very grateful to see immediate relief, and we're working with Invest Ottawa to create this kind of application form to get that, you know, facilitated as soon as possible. But, you know, as you move closer and closer to where, you know, Wellington was, and that kind of, that what was called the red zone, the impact was a lot greater than what's being offered so far. Right. So are you being consulted on these measures at all, Michelle? In fact, you know, I'd have to say this: the announcement that came from FedDev was certainly stemmed from a letter of requested support directed to our local MPs and ministers, so Minister Fortier and MP Maxey. And I would say that they have acted, and they listened and they acted on what we've requested. We didn't request that amount, obviously, but obviously it's great to see it coming. And it was direct, and they are listening. We, of course, want to see the province also step up with something.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Michelle.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so I think the financial needs are quite obvious. When you survey members to find out what their needs are, financial needs I know are at the top of the list, of course. Are there any other needs that you're hearing are necessary from members?
So members want to see supports go to their staff as well.
Okay. Yeah, of course.
From the province and from feds, I would say that understanding that the benefits that are offered when someone is not working in any way, shape, or form for 3 weeks straight, it's extremely difficult. And so the putting something in place for the people that work in these businesses that have been closed. Other things are they're looking for great marketing efforts and promotional efforts to drive people to the impacted areas. And yes, of course the financials, but yeah. And then also just, really businesses just want to be open, and I mean, open. They just want things back to normal.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned staff, because that's I think oftentimes gets lost in the conversation, right, Michelle? And I'm not taking away that businesses have been closed and those businesses have bills to pay and so forth, but so have the staff, right? You have staff that are working in some of those that are they've got rent to pay, they've got food to put on the table and that kind of thing, and sometimes it gets lost in the conversation. So appreciate you bringing that up. Let's talk about how you mentioned, of course, members waiting to reopen fully. How are they feeling about reopening? Is there still a bit of a sense of anxiety at all with some of the business owners?
There is certainly a sense of anxiety, and I'm sure you saw what happened at the Rideau Center yesterday.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense of anxiety in the terms of the continued security and safety for themselves and for their staff. There's that level of anxiety. There is a kind of sense that we're kind of in the clear, but it's certainly not normal. So people are cautiously reopening. And even then, it's, you're listening or you're watching police, tweeting things about it's okay, you can come, but they also feel that Twitter is not the channel to make these official statements about safety, and so really they're kind of waiting on the real messages coming from the city's website and from OPS.
Yeah, I was actually down on the market. Now, I know it was Family Day on Monday, so, I shouldn't say that, because, for many holidays, the market is completely open for business. And I went down to the market, to do some shopping. And every business that I walked into was so incredibly happy to have people visiting down there, but it was empty. So, I encourage people to go down there. There's plenty of parking. There's businesses that are open, and they need our support. There's no doubt about it. Michelle, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Derek.
You're very welcome. That's Michelle Grew, Executive Director of the Ottawa Coalition of BIAs. Coming up after the break, well, it is Wednesday. That means it's time for your political fix. We'll be back with your political fix right after this. Rob is off today, by the way. Derek Fage here filling in. You've been watching on Rogers TV and listening right here on City News.
news in Ottawa and the Valley. This is City News, now on 101.1 FM and 1310 AM.
It's Wednesday, February 23rd. Good morning. I'm Andrew Boyle. Right now, feeling colder in the wind in Ottawa, -9, in Smiths Falls, -7 degrees. And here's what's making news this hour. City Council meeting today for the first time since the protest convoy was cleared from the downtown. It's expected things like helping businesses affected by the ordeal and at least starting the examination of how the whole protest was dealt with from the start. Of the several interested parties of that discussion, the coalition of BIAs in the area, the chair of the organization, Michelle Grew, tells the Rob Snow Show with Derek Fage the financial impact of those closest to the protest area are far greater than what has been talked about already. She says while the city and the feds have stepped up, the province has to do that as well. One local group is calling for City Council to go further than just helping businesses affected by the protest. Horizon Ottawa says it wants council to provide some rent relief for people as well as some income support. It says while support for business has been talked about and will be introduced at council in a motion this morning, there is no mention of people. Russia evacuating its embassy in Kyiv today and pulling personnel out of its other diplomatic posts in Ukraine. Fears rise. President Vladimir Putin may be about to order an invasion. At the same time, Ukraine is urging its citizens to leave Russia as the region braces for military confrontation. City News Time, 9:32. I'm Andrew Boyle. For news anytime, follow up online at ottawa.citynews.ca.
Firm.
Fair.
Fun.
The Rob Snow Show returns
On Rogers TV and City News, 101.1 FM.
and 1310 AM.
Welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. You're watching on Rogers TV, listening on City News. Rob is off today. Derek Fage filling in. Well, it is Wednesday. It's just after 9:30. You know what that means. It is time for your political fix, and oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about. My goodness. Never a shortage of news when it comes to politics, especially here in the city of Ottawa, where it's around us at all times. Joining us for the political fix is Chris Day, president of Winston Wilmot. Chris, welcome to the show. Great to hear from you again.
Good morning, Derek. How are you?
I'm doing great, thanks. And Ashton Arsenault, vice president of Crestview Strategy. Ashton, how are you this morning?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So let's start off with grading the performance of our parliamentarians through the Emergencies Act debate. I think you'd both agree there was a lot of rhetoric from all sides. The word divisive has pretty much lost all meaning to me. Do you think the political discourse on the Hill is really dividing people? Let's start with you, Chris. What are your thoughts on how this looks to the public so far?
Oh, I think everyone is rightly disgusted with how all levels of government have handled this, and frankly, how the early part of the police response allowed this to happen. Mm-hmm. Certainly, anyone who was impacted within the core of the city is completely frustrated, if not worse. And I think people in Ottawa and across the country have kind of been looking at this city for the last 3 weeks and wondering what the heck is going on here. And so that means, I think, that people at all three levels of government have not distinguished themselves or covered themselves in glory in any way, shape, or form. And I think there's a lot of broken trust out there that needs to be mended.
Yeah, and, Ashton, I watching it and just the drama that's involved, I wonder if, obviously, I mean, they're not going to listen to us, certainly, but I wonder, should they tone down the drama around this? I know it's one of the most important things in our history when you have to use the Emergencies Act, and of course, we should have a debate about it. There's no doubt in my mind, but the way that some people in leadership have acted has just been so incredibly disappointing, Ashton.
Yeah, look, I think, first of all, I'll certainly agree with Chris. I think the situation was handled miserably from the outset, basically all the way through. But what I'll say is this. Because of, sort of increased polarity around this issue, I feel like leaders on both sides of the aisle, frankly, instead of, sort of trying to bridge that gap, have actually been doubling down on people that agree with them. And you're creating an even bigger schism, right? Now it's either you're in this camp or you're in that camp, and there is absolutely no middle ground whatsoever. And that is creating extremely hot rhetoric. In my opinion, I don't think I have seen it quite as polarized as we've been in the last 3 weeks, particularly if you're in the downtown Ottawa area where I am. Yeah. And it's really unfortunate. And, just to the political issue at hand here around the Emergency Measures Act, I do think there are very legitimate questions about some of the financial measures that are being brought in alongside this that apparently the finance minister wants to make permanent that have not been answered. And I think that's a very legitimate angle of attack for a politician to make. But beyond that, at some point, we're going to have to cool down the rhetoric a little bit because it's a bit out of control.
Chris, how dangerous is this divide? Because, I've always looked to the U.S., when I'm having conversations with my circle of family and friends and say, thankfully, Canada isn't as divided as the U.S. and we have a political system where it's not just two parties, but it seems we're going down that same path, Chris. How dangerous do you think this divide is going to become here in Canada?
Oh, I would think the U.S. model is the model of what not to do. Yeah, absolutely, in terms of political division and discourse. I'll agree with Ashton entirely that the Emergencies Act test that is in play, or series of tests that are in place, don't seem to have been met, with the possible exception of the financial measures, which is in fact a sign that the government is playing catch up on something that probably should have been done already. So I think there are really serious questions that need to be asked about the government's ability to handle big things, right? And that's at the root of what the questioning over the weekend, questioning over the last couple of weeks. Can government handle big but basic things? And when it comes to opposition parties trying to hold the government to account on their management of governing, that's partly their role. But it's also, I think, incumbent on the entire political class to turn the temperature down a little bit, depoliticize true, emergencies. And frankly, the border blockades, especially the one at Windsor, was an emergency for our economy, which is fragile to begin with, and for our reputation in the U.S. But our reputation in the U.S. and around the world and here in Canada is not improved by some of the rhetoric that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, for sure.
Ashton, Conservative interim leader Candice Bergen quietly tabled a motion just before the House adjourned after Monday's vote that would force another debate when the MPs go back to the House next week. So, what's the strategy here? Does keeping the debate about the Emergencies Act in the news help or hurt the Conservatives, do you think?
Yeah, so this would be a motion that would be debated on sort of an opposition day or an allotted day, right? And to be perfectly candid with you, I think it's a good political strategy. I do. Okay. Because I do think there are a number of questions around the usage of the Emergency Measures Act, which frankly have not been answered yet. I think the government has a little bit more to do in terms of assuring Canadians and, actually walking Canadians through the fact that it isn't being used for political purposes, both in the interim and certainly in the future, and what the pathway for removing this after the 30 days is going to be. We haven't heard much about that. Basically, the government said, look, this is in place for 30 days. If we need it beyond 30 days, we'll do it again. So what I would be looking to see is, what does that removal strategy look like? Because from where I'm sitting, the government has not done a good enough job at assuring Canadians that this will be removed quickly and why it was needed in the first place.
Ashton, I'm just going to follow up with you quickly because, you mentioned that they perhaps would like to see some of that financial side of it made permanently. So for listeners and viewers on Rogers TV, perhaps you could just explain a little more in depth about what that means to Canadians.
Well, it's a one-off comment from Canada's finance minister that some of the financial measures related to seizure of accounts and also tracking foreign funds is something that they may or may not want to make permanent, with a sort of leaning towards they may want to make it permanent. And that raises some very serious questions, because if you're looking at it at face value right now, those financial measures are targeting, one specific group of supporters or protesters or whatever label you want to use on them, right? So would that expand to, I don't know, let's say environmental organizations that fund environmental organizations in Canada that have previously blockaded pipeline projects or previously have blockaded forestry projects, that have previously blockaded rail lines? The issues go on and on and on.
Right.
And I have grave concerns if they were so targeted that it seemingly only targeted one group of people and they gave the entire other side of this debate a pass. That would be egregious in my opinion, and there are serious questions around that have not been answered.
Chris, want to follow up with you on the first question there that I posed to Ashton about Candice Bergen, tabling that motion in the House for MPs to come back and debate again. What do you think about that strategy?
Well, I think it's smart as well. I will also just echo what Ashton said. I mean, Australia has a law on the books to deal with e-transfers and crypto and various other types of monetary currencies that have evolved. Our legislation governing FinTrack and others is archaic. Frankly, it's terribly out of date. So I think there is a role for a piece of legislation like that, but it has to be applied like the rule of law generally. It has to be applied equally, and then certainly Ashton's raised a couple of examples where I think there are a lot of people who would argue that there's a seeming inconsistency here in terms of how we're dealing with one group of people versus another. I would also say that, so going back to your question on Candice Bergen, where I think it's particularly smart is that there are people who are, have their eyebrows up over that very different perceived treatment of certain groups over others in society.
Right.
There's also a not insignificant constituency out there of people who have said, thanks government for the vaccines, thanks for the CERB, now get out of my life. And I think that that's essentially what the Conservatives and the Bloc Québécois have been playing to over the last couple of days in particular, or the last couple of weeks in particular, is that the time for government overreach and perceived government overreach into people's daily lives is long since past. And I think there is a growing sentiment in this country that the Conservatives in particular are trying to tap into without going down the rabbit hole, so to speak, of saying, listen, government has had too much power in the last couple of years. They've done some good stuff. We've supported that, but we have a job to do as an opposition, and so we're going to keep them their feet to the fire and hold them to account.
I'm going to turn our attention to provincial politics now, because Doug Ford is taking a lot of flack from opposition at Queen's Park for what happened in Ottawa, even though he did declare a provincial state of emergency before the PM acted, and then of course supported the PM for using the Emergencies Act. Are those criticisms just pre-election noise for Doug Ford, Ashton?
To Chris's initial point, there is no level of government across this country that has not been tainted by this complete bungling over the past month. That having been said, when it comes to the case Doug Ford, I do not think that the ultimate blame will fall on his doorstep. I really don't. I think more blame will be labeled probably at the federal government, certainly at the municipal government in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Not to say that Premier Ford is going to get a pass on this, and he shouldn't, to be perfectly honest with you. But do I think ultimately the blame is going to fall at his doorstep? No, I do not. And I think look, we've got about a 2-month timeline now in Ontario. We'll be at the polls. The writs will be issued probably at the 1st of May, and from there, I think there will be many other pressing issues on the minds of Ontarians about what the future of the provincial government is going to look like, and hopefully this one will be in the rearview.
So I'm just going to take a quick break here. Chris, I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well, because I think there's some irony in all of this, and I agree with what Ashton just said, as most of this will fall on the federal government and, of course, the municipal government here in Ottawa. However, the irony being that most of the restrictions that protesters, were protesting against were restrictions that the provincial government put in place here in Ontario and provincial governments across the country. So we'll continue on talking a little bit of Ontario politics on your political fix right after this. This is City News and Rogers TV. Derek Fage filling in for Rob Snow.
We just took over this business about a few weeks prior to the pandemic, but we've been loving the community, the people, very friendly. But it's been very difficult starting up a new business, just the time that we did, but I'm sure it's the same everywhere. We did take a broken business, which doesn't help us, but we thought we believe in what we do. We're very passionate about food, and we just really wanted to share the Iraqi culture through our food. All our recipes are homemade, so this is very unique. Usually you hear restaurants, shops, it's all frozen food or prepared food. So nothing here is prepared, everything is homemade. We get our meat and produce from a local farm. So supporting local is the way to go. We are supporting all the way. And our meat are actually marinated the day of, so it's as fresh as can be. Quality ingredients and everything is made from scratch. I get a lot of people when they come in, they say it tastes like Middle Eastern, like back home. So for you to have been to Iraq and had the food there, you can really compare and see the similarity. We do like to focus on healthy. So our recipes, not only the homemade, again, everything is from scratch, but we have from combos and to small sandwiches. One of our favorites and very popular is the chicken salad and the beef salad. So now you're getting all the protein and all these amazing ingredients that we all need. During this time, I find a lot of people are sitting at home and not enough movement. So to come here and get something healthy other than go elsewhere and just put, what's not so good for our bodies, makes a huge difference. So we have shawarma sandwiches, combos. I mean, if you're looking for a meal to feed your family, I would highly recommend the family platter. It comes literally with everything, with potatoes, with rice, with chicken, with beef, and we don't charge extra for mix. I know a lot of places do. Here we just add everything to your platter. And lots of healthy choices for sure. We're very passionate about food, and for our small family business, it's been good. Like I said, it's a little struggle, but we are not a chained restaurant.
Community opinion.
The Rob Snow Show returns
On Rogers TV and City News.
101.1 FM
and 1310 AM.
Well, welcome back to the Rob Snow Show. Rob off today. Derek Fage here from Rogers TV filling in for Rob. Before we get back to our political fix, just want to remind you, at 10 a.m., Rogers TV is going to be leaving the Rob Snow Show to join Ottawa City Council meeting. A lot of motions before council today on many measures, including property tax deferral programs for retail businesses and restaurants in those affected areas downtown Ottawa, funding to help the most impacted business districts, free parking, no fare transit, things like that. So we'll be flipping over on Rogers TV. But if you want to continue with us here on the Rob Snow Show, you can tune in to City News 101.1 FM and 1310 AM. We continue with our political fix. Chris Day, president of Winston Wilmot, and Ashton Arsenault, vice president of Crestview Strategy, joining us. And I'm going to throw it over to Chris because before the break, we're just talking about, Doug Ford and, taking a lot of flack from the opposition at Queen's Park. No shock there, as we've been talking about, just the drama of all this, politically, how it's just been the rhetoric has been going through the roof. And so, even though he did declare a provincial state of emergency before the PM and then supported the PM on the Emergencies Act, he's still getting flack from the opposition. Are those just, criticisms, political noise, kind of pre-election noise for Ford, Chris?
Yeah, I think, the Premier acted relatively quickly when he saw what was going on at the Ambassador Bridge in Windsor, and I think that was the right thing to do, given the number of jobs in Ontario that are impacted by any trade disruption over that very vital trade corridor. So I think he did what he needed to do in a timely way. I think the blame for most of what is, we've seen here in Ottawa over the last few weeks, rightly rests at the feet of municipal leaders, including one who has, in Chief Solly, who has resigned. I think the Premier can probably insulate himself from this. And I think this week I saw a poll that said that there were still 53% of Ontarians who agreed with the general, maybe not every single measure at every single moment, but, the general handling of the pandemic by the provincial government. So I think going into a spring election, it's still Doug Ford's to lose.
Let's turn our attention back to federal politics. The Conservative leadership buzz this week, for those of us that follow politics, is all about Jean Charest. National Post reports he's being courted by at least 4 current MPs. Pierre Poilievre's campaign guru, Jenny Byrne, attacked him on Twitter yesterday. La Presse reports today that apparently Stephen Harper doesn't want the guy to run. Certainly not a welcoming environment at all, Ashton. What is your take on Mr. Charest's possible candidacy?
Apparently, Mr. Charest is the Conservative Party of Canada version of Mark Carney.
Excellent description, by the way, Ashton. Well played.
The greatest lie Charest supporters have ever told is telling us that he's a conservative. He is not. He has never purported to be one. He is a former Liberal premier. In my opinion, he would be smart not to run, in all honesty. My advice would be save the money, avoid the debt. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one thing, because I haven't seen it in media as much as I thought I would have, and that is the rule changes to how the Conservative Party of Canada elects its leaders is going to be quite a bit different this time than it was in the last go-around. And whereas previously all of the ridings across the country, so 338, were weighted the same, that is no longer the case in the upcoming race, and it makes it exceptionally challenging for a candidate like Mr. Charest to even have a chance. My advice to Mr. Charest and his campaign team, sit this out.
I actually share your opinion on that, but let's get Chris's opinion. What do you think, Chris?
Well, I heard your comments off the top of the show, Derek, about people needing to get involved in terms of party membership and being involved in the grassroots and getting involved in these processes like selecting a leader. So I will be very curious to see how party memberships go in the next few months as more leadership contenders come forth, and I hope that they do, frankly, because I think the party would benefit from a robust leadership contest and series of debates. I think a coronation is not what is needed at the moment. I think there's some really serious discussions that are needed and some policies that are required, and ultimately a questioning by party membership across the country who can win. And I think ultimately the question is not only who can win the leadership contest. So, Mr. Poilievre right now is the front runner. He's the only candidate declared, but he's the all-out front runner.
He's already running for prime minister.
Well, regardless of whether Charest or anyone else is in, he's the top dog. He's the guy to beat at the moment, right? Yeah. But that's only step one. And I think the test is going to be for Conservative members whenever they vote is, can this person, whoever we're electing, win the trust of women in suburbs? And if not, the Conservatives are not going to win government. And that's ultimately the test that party members need to apply.
Yeah, and Ashton, I think Pierre Poilievre, if this happened tomorrow, he would win. I don't think he's the right candidate for the party. That's just my personal opinion. I mean, if you want to try to get some votes away from the Liberals, I just don't think he's the candidate for you, and that's where I think they should be trying to grab votes from. But all that being said, if you had to pick a name to bet on against Poilievre, who would that be?
So I sort of disagree with the opening premise there. I could point to, the past two previous elections were examples where, we were sort of ashamed to be presented in public as conservatives, to run as conservatives. And I actually think there is more common ground with conservative ideals in this country than people are willing to admit. And I just think we hasn't been properly tapped into for quite some time. So I'll couch my comments in those. But I will say this. We have all heard that Patrick Brown is seriously considering a run, and a lot of that is going to be determined based on the rules set up by the Leadership Election Organizing Committee, or LEOC as it's known. And, depending on how short or how long or what the barriers to entering the race are, I think he would make a formidable candidate. If I'm being honest with you, I would be remiss if I did not mention how exceptional he is at organizing. His ability to sign up members would be very strong, and he would have certainly appeals on more of the left-leaning, moderate wing of the party that I think would make him very, very competitive. And the last thing I'll say is I would be shocked if a candidate representing sort of the more socially conservative tradition in the party didn't put their name forward, whether that's Leslie Lewis. We've been told that she's likely not going to run. Who knows? But if it's not her, I suspect somebody will put their name forward from that wing, and they are always very well organized and obviously quite competitive based on the last two.
Yeah, and I agree with you with your opening remarks. I do think that a lot of many Canadians agree in principle with many of the conservative policies, with the understanding that they also still have, in mind, social programs. They understand the importance of social programs. I just, see this. I think a lot of people, there seems to an appearance of shifting to the right in the wake of Mr. O'Toole stepping down, and I'm not sure that's the right direction as far as winning the next election. Again, that's just personal opinion and an opinion I've heard from others as well. When discussing federal politics. Gentlemen, we've run out of time, but always appreciate you joining us on the show. Thanks very much for joining us for another edition of The Political Fix.
Thanks, folks.
Take care.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.